Lesson 5, vCenter Server Roles and Permissions. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to meet the following objectives. What is a permission? Define it. Describe the rules for applying permissions. How do I create a custom role? How do I create a permission? Access control basically enables a vCenter Server administrator to define a user's privileges to access objects in the inventory. The key concepts here are privilege, role, object, user group. Together, a role and a user or a group and an object define a permission. So what is a privilege? A privilege is the ability to perform a specific action or read on a specific property. So if I want to view a file, that's my action, or read that file, that's the property of it. So I want to be able to power on the virtual machine. I want to be able to create an alarm with that virtual machine. Okay, what is a role? A role becomes a collection of privileges. Roles provide a way to aggregate all the individual privileges that are required to perform some high-level task that come along with administering that virtual machine. Do I want to be able to power it on? Do I want to be able to create that alarm? The object is basically the target of the action upon which the actions are performed. And the user group indicates who can perform that action. So as you see right here, all these lead to permissions. So we have our user group, our object, and our role, which all go back to what? Our permissions. So what are the vCenter Server permissions? Once again, a permission is a set on an object in the vCenter Server hierarchy. Okay? Each permission associates the object with a group or a user, and that group or user with access roles. So the example you see here is you can create or select a virtual machine object. From that object, we can add one permission that gives the read-only role to that object or that group. Then we can add a secondary user or group to that object. But all these come down to what privileges want to be associated with that role. So this one, if we take it down a level here, is only one privilege associated with that role. Up here we have a block of 3 different privileges associated with that role. Okay? So adding memory or adding permissions to your vCenter Server inventory. Here's where you want to right click on the inventory object. So we have our object here, ESXi01. Select add permissions, which is here. That comes back to where we've already seen this same look. Just know what you can do in each one here. Select user or group, select the role, select OK. So here, say I'm in DC admins. I'm going to select the DC admins. I'm going to give it all privileges. What if I don't want to give the DC admin all privileges? What if I want to give it the certificates only? What if I have a group that only deals with the data centers because I have a large organization? Here's where you can do it from. Also, while doing this, same thing with your Active Directory. Separate multiple names with semicolon, and you can check the name to make sure it's a valid name within your user structure. So with that being said, you right click on the inventory object, select add permission, select the user or group. Once you select that group, you select that role, click OK. Then that will be added over here, the role here, and that's where you can actually add as well. About roles. Privileges are basically grouped into roles. They allow users to perform tasks. They're grouped into categories that make them simpler to configure. And when I say simpler, that makes it more manageable. How easy do I want it to be to configure them? Okay? So what happens in vCenter Server, it provides a few default roles which you cannot modify. So with that being said, the default roles are administrator, read-only, no access, and no cryptography administrator. The only roles that you can modify are these right here. Do not try to modify these roles. You can't. Up here, and it even tells you default roles you cannot modify. Within those roles, we have the usage and we have the privileges. We see here we're on VCS 801 object. Here are the privileges. We break that down. We have our alarms, our auto deploy certificates. You have a whole list of them here. Choose that privilege because a privilege allows access to a specific task and is grouped with other privileges that are related to it. Okay? So if you look basically at the 4 default roles that cannot be changed or modified, the administrator role are users with the administrator role for the object that are allowed to view and perform all the actions on that object. So if I were to take another user in the company or the organization that I work for supposedly, and I put them in this administrator role here, they're going to have access to all those privileges, objects associated. The read-only role only allows users to read that object or to view the state of the object and the details about it. So tell me about, I want to know about that object. Well, I'm going to give you access, read-only access. Go look at the object and you can see what the object is, what it's about, the details of it. That's the user you want to use right there. What about no access? Say you have a user that's not being compliant organization. They want to block all of his access to those privileges. Well, what you do right there is do that no access role, and that way they cannot view that object or change that object in any way. So basically, that object is not there for them. What about the no cryptography administrator role? That role has the same privileges as user with an administrative role, except they cannot do cryptographic operations. So basically, just remember, the administrator and this one are basically the same. The only difference, they can do no cryptography roles or anything dealing with cryptography privileges in that role. So what about objects? Objects are entities on which actions are performed. Objects include data centers, folders, resource pools, the host, data stores. You get the point. So each object that you click on here, that is the entity or the object which the action is performed. All objects have permissions tabs. While you're looking at it, while you're navigating through your vCenter server, you'll notice that each object you do has a permissions tab. And it tells you, okay, the user group, the role, and where it is defined at. Well, as we see right here, this vSphere Local Administrator is defined in VCS 801 object. So we have all these objects here under this VCS 801 vClass Local. That shows, once again, which user group role is associated with each object. So what about global permissions? Global permissions support assigning privileges across solutions from the global root object. as you see right here, here's your global root object. Those global permissions span solutions for your vCenter server or your vRealize orchestrator. The global permissions give a user or a group privileges for all objects in the objects hierarchy, meaning that if I give a user group privileges for all the objects, the global permissions, they're going to have it all throughout here, right? So they're going to be able to go through here, all of them, everything. So if I'm giving them global, boom, there it goes. They got it all throughout, all the way down through the hierarchy. And each leg that breaks off from the global root objects. When you apply that permission, you specify that a user or group has a set of privileges called a role, right? And that role is based on that object. So the global permission gives a user the group privilege, or a group, the user or the group, to view or manage all the objects in each inventory hierarchy that is deployed. So as I laid out, here's each object that has been deployed here. Well, guess what? They can view everything in that. So with that being said, that slide basically shows the global root object. And that global root object has the reign over the vCenter server instance, over the data center folder here in the data center, and over the content library over here to the left, and the library item, the tag category, and the tag. But the biggest thing here to know as well is they're effective only on objects in that vCenter server instance, which is here. Now, how do we assign the permissions? You add permissions by adding a user or a group, and by selecting a role from the role list. You can also choose to propagate the permission to all child objects. So we have what? We have the parent and the child object. What is the parent object? What is the child object? Okay. So by us looking here, role propagation is an act of passing along permissions. So a role can be propagated to its child objects in inventory. For each permission that you set, you decide whether the permission propagates down the hierarchy, which would be this way through this list here, or to all the sub-objects which are in that list that apply to the original object. Okay? So with that being said, if I want to propagate this description, all privileges, to all my children, the child objects, check that box right there. If you're not sure who is in that list, VMware now, man, they have it in there. Go view who you're going to propagate those permissions to, or that role to. Go look at it. Once you get all that done, then you're good. Then you can grant another role, so you can just keep building on it. You can grant roles based on your organization. So how do I view the roles and assignments? To view the roles and assignments, click on the usage in the roles pane. So right here we're in the roles pane on this object, VCSA01, on the usage tab. Right? We can select that role in the list right here. The roles are here. We can select that role, and it's going to show me basically who is assigned of the users and groups who are granted to use that role. Here's where we can add them. We can delete them. We can modify those roles. Just know each one that you click on, so I want to see who has no access. It's going to show you over here the usage of them and who has what privileges assigned within it. Know where you stand on this. Know who's using what, why, and where. All right, great scenario here. A permission can propagate down the object hierarchy to all sub-objects, or it can apply only to the immediate object. So, on this slide, we have Greg as a user, right? Greg is given read-only access to the training data center. So we see that right here, right? Read-only access to this training data center. The role is propagated to all child objects except one, right? The prod 032 here, because under the training data center we had our test and dev and our production site, Greg has been assigned the administrator role. So, with that being said, Greg can only read, he can only view the status and what it is on Dev 01, 2, and 3, Prod 031, Prod 042, 043, and the Prod template. But Greg is an administrator over Prod 032 and can make changes on that virtual machine on that object here. Okay, so let's dig a little deeper. Let's go to this scenario. What about when a user is a member of multiple groups with permissions on the same object? The user is assigned the union of privileges assigned to that groups for that object. So, okay, so we have two groups. Group 1 is assigned the VM Power On custom role. This is a custom role that contains only one privilege, right? Group 2 is assigned the Take Snapshots custom role. How do we know it is assigned basically to one privilege? Well, it tells us. If that would have said Group 1 has VM Power On custom role and Take Snapshots, that would have multiple privileges within that group they could do. But each one only has one privilege allowed for them to do. Okay? So, Group 2 has the Take Snapshots custom role, and another custom role that contains the privileges to create and remove snapshots, right? Based on both rules propagating to the child objects. Now, let's look. So Group 1, we have Greg and Susan. What can Greg and Susan do out of Group 1? Well, Greg and Susan both, out of every object in the test and dev and production group, or objects, or this whole training data center, they can only, or Greg and Susan can take VM Power On. They can power on VMs, right? Can't shut them down and can't do anything else to them. But if you look at members of Group 2, Greg also has permission to take snapshots, but Susan does not. Carla in Group 2 has permission to power on virtual machines. So as you see, Greg is a member of Group 1 and Group 2, which is here, and he can actually perform both custom roles of powering on the VM or taking snapshots within this whole training data center. All right, so let's look at the next scenario. What about when a member is a user of multiple groups with permissions on different objects for each object on which the group has permissions? The same permissions apply but are granted directly to the user. So I think I highlighted this in the other one. Okay? So members of Group 1 are administrators, and members of Group 2. So members of Group 1 are Greg and Susan. Greg and Susan are administrators over the training data center. right? So Susan literally is an administrator of everything. But there's another group associated here. And because it's a lower level object, Greg is a member of group 2, right? And so is Carla. Carla can't do nothing in this data center but on prod 031, and the only thing Greg can do is read only. But why is Greg an administrator over the whole group, but he can only do read only? That's where it becomes the higher level object, except for the virtual machine. Excuse me, I apologize. Except for the virtual machine that Greg gets the read only access to. So I hope that makes sense, that you see that we have a higher level and a lower level. Greg has permission as an administrator throughout the whole object training data center. Susan of group 1 is an administrator of everything. She can change anything. So group 2, Carla, can only see prod 031 but can't see everything else. Greg can still see everything, but Greg can only has read only permissions on prod 031. All right, let's look at this scenario. Permissions defined explicitly for a user on an object take precedence over all group permissions on the same object. All right, so let's break it down. Let's look at this. There's 3 permissions assigned here, group 1, group 2, and Greg. Group 1 is assigned the VM power on role, custom role. Once again, we know it's the only role in that group. Group 2 has 1 role, take snapshots. And Greg, the user, because we still have Greg, Susan, and Carla, both members, has a read-only role. Okay? So being that's the case, so in this scenario, group 1 can power on everything in there. So let's take that back. Assume Greg is a member both group 1 and group 2. Also assume that the propagation to the child objects is enabled on all of those roles here. Okay? Although Greg is a member of group 1 and group 2, he gets read-only privileges to the data center and all the objects under it. Greg gets the read-only privilege because the explicit user permissions on the object take precedence over all group permissions on the same object. Okay, so let me say that again, and please understand this. Because it is a read-only privilege explicitly for Greg, right? We specifically said Greg only gets read-only. That takes precedence over these groups, group 1 and group 2, that Greg is a part of. So once you explicitly say a user in a group has this, that takes precedence over the group that they will currently be in, group 1 or group 2. So how do we create a role? Create a role is the ability that enables you to do certain tasks on the virtual machine. And great example, take snapshots, create a virtual machine, power on a virtual machine, power off a virtual machine. You can use folders to contain the scope of the permissions. An example of that, same thing. Assign a virtual machine, create a role to the user Nancy, and apply it to a finance folder. The virtual machine creator role has several ones that can be created. So you could do a data store, allocate space. Network, assign network. Resource, assign a virtual network to a resource pool. Virtual machine, inventory, create new. Virtual machine configuration, add a new disk to that virtual machine in configuration settings. Add or remove a device in that virtual machine. As best practice, what VMware states, and I agree with this, best practice, like VMware states, define a role using the smallest number of privileges possible so that you can get the most security control out of your environment and maximize that security control. By doing that, you want to also give those roles names that explicitly indicate what each role allows to make its purpose clear. Clear and concise. Same thing I asked from you in discussion forums. Be decisive on your answers. Same thing with VMware. They want you to be clear and decisive. Data store, only allocate space. On this virtual machine, I only want it to be able to add a new disk. Okay, be concise about what you wanted. Use those folders to contain the scope of permissions. Okay, so with that being said, all these creator roles, are they concise? Do they get directly to the point and indicate what that user could do? You should now be able to meet the following objectives. What is a permission? Define it. Describe the rules for applying permissions. Create a custom role or create a permission.